Oops, can I be boring now? I'm a professor. It's an occupational hazard. We like studying these things. Of course, everybody knows you need partners, you need projects. That's nothing new. You need people. Duh, Paul, I knew that before the meeting. So show me something that's new. Well, let's try to quantify some of that. And we want to look at these networks. So what do these networks look like? And we looked at 3 growing sectors in the economy. We looked at clean technology, creative and cultural sectors, and local food to say, what do they look like? Well, this is a technique, you've probably seen examples before, of social network analysis. What does this network look like? Well, we want to know how dense is it in terms of how many lines, how much interaction. You know, how central? Is there one central source of information, or are there many? We want to know, are there differences between different players? Are there differences between the urban areas or the rural areas? Or between the different sectors? Are there critical gaps in the network that should be filled? How are we going to find out? Well, this is the summary, if you like, of our 3 different sectors, food, creative, and clean. And they're not the same. Oh. Well, for a researcher, that's really interesting. And it's not surprising. You've got different networks, different structures, depending on what part of the economy you're looking at. But it also means that if you're this isolated node in the food sector, you break that link, you suddenly have lost a lot of your connection of who do I go for information in that area, as opposed to being tightly connected where you take out any one circle here, there are many other sources of information. So suddenly you can start looking and say, oh, I don't need to know the details at all, but I'm going to know that a point that is better connected has more sources of information. Oh yeah, they're more resilient if any one of those sources moves. Now maybe if I'm one of those isolated points out on the end with one weak line tying me into the group, I better think, maybe I should add a second line. I mean, I really like you as a source of information, but maybe I'd better add a second point on this next table of thinking having more sources can be useful. So this gives us a tool to analyze change in our communities. And it also brings us back to interesting insights. Interesting insights to note our networks are not new. They are built on our history. So it's interesting when you see new firms being created that are actually have linkages back to some of your old firms. Everybody says, well, yeah, oh, isn't that exciting? You've got this new solar power panel producing plant coming in your community. That's great. But it's not there accidentally. It's actually there, you know, solar, Canadian Solar and PhotoWatt, nice new firms, nice new plants. But they're actually there because of ATS automation, already having the industrial network in place. So then I know who I can go to contract for different specialized services. We sometimes talk about path dependency, how one decision leads to the next. And this is the type of thing you can watch as you look at your network. Where is it taking you? But it also represents your strengths, your assets that you can build with. So this, again, is just another tool of saying, what does the network look like in your community? What are the parts of that network that you want to reinforce, that you want to see stronger? Oh, now I can actually look and actually have a strategic plan to say, I want to build or add these new components to complement that existing part of the network. Wow. We can also then talk about what types of models you want. If you want to have a network within the nonprofit sector in the community, do we want to have a dominant central agency that's providing the information to everyone? It's the same story as whether you're looking at regional development, having a strong, dominant central agency. Or, in today's era, you can have the networked approach that says, we don't need the one boss. Instead, we can have a strong network amongst all of the different units. Wow. So these networks give us opportunities to choose the structure that we want. But you'll note that these connections are critically important. So you can have a broader discussion building the community, building the capacity, What's the type of network you want to tie those different groups together? If we've got 130 or 200 or however many nonprofit groups you have here, how do you want them interconnected? What's the pattern that you would like to see? Well, it's also good to know what your current pattern is, but then you can start thinking about how do we transition? How do we take that ship from where we were to where we want to get to? And what are the pieces that we want to reinforce? To me, well, it's exciting because it's visual, it's not so many numbers on the page, but it lets you think about who are the different players, who are the different sources, and if you want to take a few more minutes, I thank you for changing your tables because I'd like you to do just a small group exercise to reinforce this idea. I would like you to do, at your table groups, first introduce yourselves. Many of you will know each other already, but that's why I asked you to change tables because we typically sit with our friends, people we already know. So I ask you to introduce yourselves and then just note how many people did you know beforehand, and not just know because, oh, you're famous, so I know you. How many people had you talked to beforehand? How many people had you exchanged information with around your table? Is it half of your table, all of your table? It's just, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's just saying, you know, is this an established network or not? And then also, are you using this frequently? You might have known the person, but if you haven't spoken to them for 2 years, you know, so then it's sort of, okay, how many people have you talked to in the last 2 months? So this just gives you a sense of the network around your table. So that's the first thing I would ask you to do. And then there's a second part to the exercise. And this becomes one of your network is important for your information source. Okay, this is the network that you're using. You're collecting your information. We're all looking at times of change. What is the most critical thing in all of our organizations? People. It's the human capital. Who keeps things running? What's going to create that change? I'm sorry, but congratulations. You've just got this offer you can't say no to. So you decide that you're going to move, but you still feel a loyalty to your organization. How are you going to replace yourself? I was first going to give you an easy one, like hire somebody of a particular function, but that's too easy. This makes it actually challenging of saying, no, I want you to replace yourself. And where are you going to look? Who are the first 3 sources you're going to start looking for to try to say, where am I going to find someone to take my job? And I'm asking you to share that discussion because it's going to help you think about, you know, is there the perfect temp agency that says, sure, I've got another Russell, we've got a dozen of them lined up. Or suddenly realizing, oh, sorry, there's only one Russell. We're going to have to look very carefully. And where are you going to start looking? What is your network for filling that HR gap? So 2 assignments. Please look at the familiarity of your network. How many did you know before? How many have you talked to within the last 2 months? And then identify your first 3 points of contact. What network are you going to use to answer your HR crisis? How do I replace myself?